Hello, this is Dale Ingram with Speaking Truth Love Ministries. Today, our study is going to be in Daniel chapter 8. If you've got your Bibles handy, we're doing an end time Bible study. And eventually, when we finish this particular Bible study, we'll be moving on to another book, possibly Genesis, possibly the Gospel of John. I haven't decided which one I'm going to do next. But we're going to be a while yet still looking at end time stuff. But before we get to Daniel chapter 8, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the world today, because obviously the world's like a powder keg. And I want to talk about a number of different things. I was watching a video today, and I think it was Sling and Stone. You can find him on YouTube if you look up Sling and Stone. He's got some really good information. I would recommend Sling and Stone, Prophecy Watchers with Gary Stearman, and they have a lot of different speakers on there. Jan Markell with Olive Tree Ministries. All of those are great places to find information on the end times. So if just because of everything that's happening in the world, you can't get enough good biblical information. And what we want to do is pair the biblical information with current events. And these sites will do that. I was watching Sling and Stone today, and they were talking about one of the things trending on the internet is the subject of World War III. And we've, from time to time, we talk about that, right? We had World War I, World War II, both major world wars. Millions of people died in those wars. And at some point, World War III is going to happen. The question is, and the timing of all of this really is tied to the rapture of the church and the beginning of the 7 years of tribulation. And obviously, we don't know when that's going to be. It certainly looks like we are in the last days. And, the rapture obviously could be at any time. It may be a number of years away yet. What I want to think about for a minute with what's going on in the world today, with President Trump and the administration, the team went in, special forces went into Venezuela, captured Maduro. He's under arrest. And keep in mind now, he was indicted. He was an indicted drug dealer, and he was arrested in this raid, brought back to the U.S. He's in New York to stand trial in a federal court on these various charges. But the point is, in bringing this up, the whole world, all the conflicts going on in the world, Russia and the war in Ukraine, and tensions are high. China wants to invade Taiwan, take that over. They want to bring that back under their authority. They want to have control of that. China is pushing itself out. They're building a powerful military. They've got more ships than the U.S. does, which is scary, in their naval force than we have in our naval force. Doesn't mean that their ships necessarily are superior to ours. I think the U.S. ships, from everything I've seen, are still considered superior. But the point is, you have all of these tensions. And Vladimir Putin has openly been talking about using nuclear weapons. And he warns Europe continually, if NATO gets involved in this war with Ukraine, and they cross, any number of red lines, that Russia intends to attack them. And there's been at least, I think, 3 incidents where Russian missiles have gone outside of the Ukrainian borders and have actually hit into NATO territory. So you have all this stuff going on. Everything's a tinderbox. And, President Trump is determined that the U.S. needs to have control of Greenland. And try to keep in mind now, because I don't want to wade into the politics stuff of this, because it's just going to sideline us. So when I talk about President Trump, my point is, I'm not looking at it as whether it's good or bad. This is what's going on. It's what's happening. How does that fit in, or how might it fit in to Bible prophecy. So regardless of whether you like President Trump's decision to aggressively pursue Greenland and try to take control of Greenland, or you disagree, regardless of that, that's not the point. The point is it's happening. Now, we don't know if President Trump's going to be successful in this, but here's the concern. If China or Russia get control of Greenland, or China in the South China Sea, China has been going out onto these islands. In some cases, they're literally making the islands, right? A shallow area. Maybe you have a small island in the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean, and they build that up artificially, which they're doing in numerous locations. And then once they get the island built up enough, so literally bringing sand and material from the ocean floor up on, building these islands out, and then they build military installations and they claim it as Chinese territory. Well, territorial waters, right? If you've got a nation or land, you have, so many miles out from that's considered then sovereign territory, not international waters. So as China leapfrogs out on these different islands, some of them that they're literally making, claiming them for Chinese territory, building small military bases where they can land planes and have cargo and stuff and weapons. So they're expanding their reach. And so you have conflict with China and the Philippines. You've got conflict between China and in Japan. Japan has actually come out recently and made some very strong statements that if China attacks Taiwan, that will trigger Japan getting into war with China. So the rhetoric here is continuing to build. Now, President Trump, is trying to end wars. It's one of his stated goals, and he succeeded in some areas. You have a lot of talk about peace, but we have a lot of talk about war, both going on at the same time. And all of the stuff we just talked about are conflicts outside of the Middle East. And we bring the Middle East into discussion, the Gaza Strip. Israel has soundly defeated Hamas, but they're still there in part of Gaza. Israel's pulled back a bit. We're officially entering phase 2 of President Trump's 20-point peace plan with the Gaza Strip. We don't know where that's going to go, but the second phase involves disarming Hamas. Either they're going to do it willingly, or Israel, the U.S., President Trump's putting together a coalition, trying to put together a coalition of Arab nations to come in and disarm them. So they'll either do it peacefully or by force. So there may be more war, more conflict in the Gaza Strip in the near future as they try to disarm Hamas. All of that's going on. Conflict in Syria. Now, all of these riots, it's a massive uprising in Iran. And it's a combination of dynamics in Iran. Now, keep in mind, Iran refers to Israel as the little Satan and U.S. as the big Satan. We look back at Iran, and Iran is clearly a key axis of evil. They have spent billions upon billions upon billions of dollars funding all of these terrorist organizations. And the goal of the terrorist organizations is to kill and terrorize. And in the process of doing that, spread Islam, conquer and destroy other nations. And the crowning jewel would be for them to destroy Israel. They want to wipe Israel off the map. The Bible talks about that in a number of places throughout the Old Testament, that even back then, the nations around Israel hated her. She's God's chosen nation. The land was God's chosen land. God refers to it as his inheritance. He's put Israel there. So all of these conflicts are going on today. And now there is a lot of talk about a possible World War III. And that's one of the reasons that President Trump desperately wants control of Greenland. I believe we have a military base there, but Greenland is huge. And this Golden Dome, this defense system that President Trump wants to set up, and much like Israel, but keep in mind, Israel is a little tiny nation about the size of New Jersey. Now, when you're talking about taking a defensive position, it's obviously, in one sense, it's easier to defend a small area, right? If you've got this dome system that Israel has to shoot down any incoming missiles, any enemy planes coming in, they can shoot them down. But now you expand that out to the United States. You've got the lower 48, you've got Alaska, you've got Hawaii. If we could have control of Greenland and had a significant military presence on Greenland, as well as this Golden Dome system that President Trump is very rapidly trying to get set up, because he knows what's coming. We don't know when it's going to happen, but World War III, there isn't any doubt, is going to happen. From a biblical perspective, it's going to happen during the 7 years. Could happen prior to the 7 years. We don't know that for sure. But just from a secular perspective, the Bible aside for a minute, everything is saying there's going to be another major world war. And China wants to be the key player. Russia wants to be dominant. Turkey wants the caliphate to be set up again like it used to be in the Ottoman Empire. So you have all this ambition out there to take over the world. Islam wants to take over the world. They're actively, through many different ways, working on taking over the world. And so all of these dynamics are happening. It's a tinderbox. Reminds me of what Jesus said in Matthew 24, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. In World War I and World War II, you had many different nations of the world that were fighting either on one side or the other side. So in World War II, you have the Allied forces, you've got Germany, Italy, Japan. So it was basically the three of them against the rest of the world. But in Bible prophecy of the end times, when Jesus is talking about nation against nation, it's going to be a lot more chaotic in a sense than World War II was, where it's two sides. I think what we're going to see is all these different conflicts. India and Pakistan. I didn't even mention those two, but India and Pakistan. There's a lot of hatred and resentment back and forth. Afghanistan, ruled by the Taliban now, it doesn't get along with either India and sometimes Pakistan. So they have all these regional conflicts. And I think what Christ is talking about, when the rider on the red horse comes out, the second seal, Revelation chapter 6, and war really breaks out over the face of the earth, it's going to be many different wars with one nation against a neighboring nation, and over here another nation against a neighboring nation, and so on. While that's all playing out, the European Union is going to be amassing a huge army. The 200 million man army will be the European Union and its allies that they're able to gather together. So all of those dynamics are going on. And we look at the world today, and there's a convergence of a lot of different things, all coming together like the Bible said. Every verse, every line, every word that the Bible says about the end times, it's all going to come to pass exactly the way the Bible says it. And I think none of us, as we read the word, are going to understand it perfectly, right? But the goal is to have a good understanding, a good working knowledge of what does the Bible say about the end times. And getting now a little bit, let's get into Daniel for a minute. So we've looked at Daniel chapter 2. That's the image the head of gold, shoulders and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, feet of iron clay. You've got the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, then the Roman Empire. And the feet are the revived, or we often call the revived Roman Empire. So Roman Empire in the last days ruled by 10 kings. The same thing that we saw last week in Daniel 7. 4 beasts come up out of the sea, and you've got the lion, the bear, and the leopard. Same 3 empires, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greek. The 4th empire, the beast is not named, but we know that it's Rome. Now we're going to come to chapter 8. And what's interesting about chapter 8 is in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, God gave us that timeline from the Babylonian Empire all the way through to the second coming of Christ, where he comes down from heaven and sets up his kingdom, right? His kingdom is the final kingdom on this earth, and he's going to rule on this earth for 1,000 years. That's what the middle kingdom is. It's like mankind, God has given mankind 6,000 plus years to get it right, and we haven't. I mean, the closest, under King David and then King Solomon, we saw some amazing things, but it's never been right. You have all this idol worship, all this wickedness around the world, but when Jesus Christ finally comes and he's anointed King of Kings and Lord of Lords, he's going to establish his kingdom and rule it with a rod of iron. I mean, he's not going to tolerate open rebellion, open sin. He's not going to put up with that stuff. The kind of stuff that's going on today, he's not putting up with that. Now, it's going to be a beautiful kingdom. It's going to be paradise. And we'll get into that more in the future. We're going to be talking about prophecies in the Old Testament, especially about that Millennial Kingdom. But that's probably a month or so away. But Daniel chapter 8, Daniel has a vision. And it comes back to the third empire, the Greek Empire. So let's pick up our reading with Daniel chapter 8 and verse 1 and see what Daniel's vision is about. So in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. So Daniel 2, that dream was Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but Daniel interpreted it. Chapter 7 is the first vision he's talking about here. Now chapter 8 is the second vision he has. He says, I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. Now, one of the things interesting about the province of Elam is in modern day Iran. It's in the western part of Iran. It's where Iran has their nuclear facilities. And there's an end times prophecy that the land of Elam is going to be judged. It's going to be basically set on fire. A lot of people have been wondering, when Israel and the U.S. attacked Iran's nuclear facilities, they were wondering, theorizing in some cases, that perhaps there's going to be a nuclear explosion in the land of Elam. That's the province Daniel is actually writing from. That's where he has his vision. He's in captivity, although he's highly respected and he's been exalted right under Nebuchadnezzar. He was number 2 in the kingdom because he interpreted that dream. Well, when Babylon fell and the Medes and the Persians took over, guess what? Daniel was still highly respected. And so he's in the province of Elam, which is modern day Iran, and he's by the river Ulai. Verse 3, then I lifted my eyes and saw there standing beside the river was a ram which had 2 horns. The 2 horns were high, but the one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. but he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. He's talking about speed. And the goat had a notable horn between its eyes. But he came to the ram that had the two horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, broke his two horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Therefore, the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, four notable ones came up toward the four winds of heaven. Now, the horns, if you remember in Revelation 13, the beast with the seven heads, the 10 horns, we see it in Revelation 12, Revelation 13, and again in Revelation 17 and 18. Those horns refer to leaders, kings. And we see the same thing here. The horn referring to a notable leader coming to power. Nebuchadnezzar was, what the most powerful individual in his day and conquered, much of the then known world and so on. Alexander the Great, this is the Greek Empire. He's the notable horn. On this goat, but he dies young. He conquers the world, but he dies young, and then four generals take over. That's what it's talking about. Now, let's go down. When we get to verse 9, there's going to be a shift in this. Back to verse 8, though. Therefore, the male goat became very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, four notable ones came up toward the four winds of heaven. So that's the four generals that take over after Alexander the Great dies. Now, verse 9. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land, referring to the land of Israel. So there's a historical character, Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember, Daniel is having a vision of something that's happening in the future. He's living at the time in the Medo-Persian Empire. Babylon has fallen. Daniel is in the Medo-Persian Empire. He has this vision, and it's talking about when Greece comes to power and defeats the Medo-Persian Empire, and then Alexander the Great himself will be destroyed, the kingdom turned over to four generals. Then you have this notable horn that rises up. Antiochus Epiphanes hated the Jewish people. And he was a really bad character, but he was strong. He never attained to Alexander the Great's ability to conquer the world, but he ruled and had a strong army, and he ruled much of that territory, including the land of Israel. Now, between the Old Testament and the New Testament, between Malachi and Matthew, there's 400 years of history. We don't have any biblical record. Once Malachi had written the book of Malachi for 40 years, there's nothing. And then you have Matthew and the Gospels and the coming of Christ. It's during that time when Antiochus Epiphanes goes into the land of Israel and he desecrates the temple. So I think initially in verse 9, there's a reference, even though it doesn't name Antiochus Epiphanes, it's obvious that they're referring to him, an historical character. But very quickly, it's also, it's like it evolves or transitions from Antiochus, talking about Antiochus in verse 9, very quickly transitions over talking about the Antichrist in the 7 years of tribulation. And that's going to become obvious as we read down through here. So I want to pick it up here with verse 10. And it says, it grew up to the host of heaven. So it's a reference to the horn. It says it grew up to the host of heaven, which is kind of interesting language. And it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Now, when we get to verse 10, we've already gone. I think verse 9 is that refers to Antiochus Epiphanes, but also the Antichrist. It's like a foreshadowing. But when we read verse 10, there's nothing in there talking about reaching up to heaven and bringing down, some of the host, and has nothing to do with Antiochus. Now he's talking about the Antichrist and some of the satanic stuff that's going to be happening during the 7 years of tribulation. And I think it becomes more evident as we go on here. Verse 11, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. That sounds very much like Revelation 13. We'll go there in a minute. But let's read a little bit farther. So he exalts himself, and we read a little bit about the Antichrist. Paul talks about it, 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, and in a number of other places in the New Testament. This coming Antichrist, this lawless one that's going to come, and he's going to exalt himself, and Jesus referred to him also that he's going to go in a Holy of Holies, present himself and declare himself to be God. So as we read in here, I think we are obviously talking about now the Antichrist, and it's during the 7 years of tribulation. So he says here, verse 11, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Now, it's talking past tense, were taken away. Well, even Antiochus is future for Daniel. What's happening is, again, Daniel sees a vision, right? So he's seeing it like, not like slides. He's seeing the video. He's seeing the movie. He's seeing the action. And so Daniel's describing past tense what he's seen in the vision. Sacrifices were taken away. Let's read a little bit farther. Verse 12. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifice and cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Now, it's hard to go through these verses and not stop every couple verses and give some commentary on them. But eventually we'll get all the way through the chapter today. But where it talks about this army, because of transgression, you remember Jesus in Matthew 24 refers back to Daniel 9. Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, Jesus said, then get out. Don't go back in the house to get your clothes. If you're in the field, don't go back to the house. You've got to get out right now. When that image goes into the holy place. And Revelation 13, the false prophet tells the world, you need to make an image to the beast, the Antichrist, that had the deadly wound, came back to life. When all that happens, the false prophet tells the world we need to make an image of this beast, and then they're going to put that in the holy place, in the rebuilt temple, right? There's no temple there now. But very soon there's going to be a temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It may happen after the rapture of the church in the first part of the tribulation. We might see it go up before. There's nothing set in stone there one way or the other. Everything's ready to go. They have all the stuff that they need. They trained the priests, they have all that stuff. They're all ready to go. And of course, you see the issue, the red heifers. They claim that they've got two that qualify still. For the red heifer, they need the ashes from the red heifer to purify everything once everything's up. and then they can begin sacrificing. All of that's going to take place. But when Jesus said, when you see that the abomination of desolation, that's the image, go in the holy place, and you've got to flee. Well, the desolation is this army. And what we think is going to happen, God protects Israel the first half of the tribulation period. Gog-Magog war, God annihilates Russia, Turkey, Iran, and the allied nations with them, annihilates them on the mountains of Israel. God protects Israel the first half. But we think the leaders of Israel, the nation of Israel, when the Antichrist comes, this covenant that he shall, Daniel 9 says, he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, for 7 years. We think there's an agreement between Israel, somebody out of the European Union confirms that covenant, likely, and it's going to be with Israel and many nations. When the Antichrist receives a deadly wound halfway through and then comes back to life, and the false prophet says, we're going to make an image, put it in the holy place, we think Israel goes along with that. They agree to that. God is going to be furious with Israel because once again, they will have turned their back on him, and now they're going to be worshiping an image of the Antichrist. So everything changes. I think it's one of the reasons we see the first half versus the second half. And we see the 7 years split into these two halves. Well, what God's going to do then, God's going to bring that 200 million man army. They've conquered the world. They've killed 1/3 of all mankind at this point. 6th trumpet judgment in Daniel chapter 9. But then God himself is going to bring that massive army down, and they're going to break the back of the Jews, and they're going to come into the promised land, and the sacrifices are going to stop. That's what this is talking about right here. When he's going to cause these sacrifices to cease. That's going to be halfway through. And then what we know is going to happen from these other passages, Daniel 9 and then up in Revelation, is that the image, instead of sacrificing to God, the image is going to be set there, and the sacrifices and the worship is going to be directed towards the image, and ultimately the beast, the false prophet, and of course, ultimately who? Ultimately Satan. And so devastation and destruction are going to come, and that's why God brings the army down. And so all of that is developing in this vision. And so verse 11 again, he even exalts himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary cast down. Because of transgression, that's going to be the image going in. An army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifice and cast truth to the ground. God is actually going to bring this deadly army, the most deadly army that has ever lived. It will no doubt, if we look at descriptions, which we're going to look at in the future, we're going to go to Zechariah, Zephaniah, Joel, some of the descriptions of this army will no doubt involve conventional warfare, modern day warfare, tanks, guns, but it seems pretty obvious it also involves drones. It involves aircraft. In the descriptions that we see, leaping over the mountains, right? Aircraft. Swarm technology is actually described in interesting detail in these passages. So we'll get to those in the future. But when it says here that they're going to come in, truths cast to the ground, he did all this and prospered. Verse 13, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one, so 2 angels, said to the certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning? Now listen, follow me on this for a minute. How long? One angel's asking the other angel. How long concerning the daily sacrifices? So that's one thing, the daily sacrifices, the transgression of desolation. Well, we know that's halfway through the 7 years when the image goes in. So the daily sacrifices, the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. That's Revelation chapter 11 when it talks about the two witnesses. John's measuring the temple and outside, and the angel tells him because Jerusalem is going to be overrun by the Gentiles. That's what this verse is talking about. So the angel's asking the other angel, how long, what's the period of time that we have the daily sacrifices, the transgression, and then the Gentiles overrunning Israel again? In verse 14, he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. But we know the sanctuary won't be cleansed until Jesus Christ comes back at the second coming. That's 6.5 years. If you do the math on, and it says here 2,300 days, 6.5 years. Is this referring to, which is just, I'm posing this as a question. It's one of those things that, there's different thoughts, different ideas on this. But if in fact we're talking about the time of the tribulation, how does that 6.5 years fit in there? Well, again, we know when the sanctuary is going to be cleansed. That will be when Christ goes back at the end of the 7 years. So if you back up 6.5 years, that puts us 6 months into the tribulation period. So is that indicating to us that at the 6 month point of the 7 years, let's say the rapture happens tomorrow, and let's say the 7-year covenant is signed in the next few days, the next week or so. I don't think there's a big gap in there at all. I think it's going to be rapture of the church. We're taken out of the way, and then immediately things begin to happen. That 7-year covenant signed or strengthened. 6 months of false peace. 6 months, and during maybe that 6 months, Israel gets the temple built, purifies everything, cleanses everything with the ashes of the red heifer, and at the 6 month point begins the sacrificial system. Because the question is one angel to the other, how long? And it involves three things. The sacrifices, let me read again. How long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices? So it's an ongoing thing. Israel sets it up, gets the temple built, purified, cleansed, and they begin the sacrificial system. Daily sacrifices, the transgression of desolation. And again, we know when that is. That's halfway through, when the image goes in. And then the sanctuary is cleansed at the end. So it looks to me like what that verse is talking about in that 2,300 days is talking about within the first 6 months of the 7 years, the sanctuary is built, the temple's built. After 6 months, the sacrifices begin. Now, I'm not going to say that, I'm going to stake my life on that, but I'm just saying, looking at that verse, I think that's a possible understanding of that. And we have a specific number of days, which is quite interesting. And one angel asking the other. It's not Daniel. It's interesting how one angel asks, or one holy person asking the other. So we assume an angel asking an angel. Obviously, for Daniel's benefit, he's listening, he's writing it down. Now let's go on to verse 15. Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called and said, Gabriel, which now we have one of these angels identified, right? Gabriel. And make this man understand the vision. So is this, perhaps Michael saying to Gabriel, help him to understand the vision? So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. That's really important. So I've got that underlined. Vision refers to the time of the end. We know that we're not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes anymore. Antiochus Epiphanes is not a part of the last days. He's pre-cross. He's Christ. He's certainly not a part of the end times. But it looks like the Antichrist, there may be a type of Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus Epiphanes is a foreshadowing of this end time character in his hatred for the Jews and the fact that he also stopped the daily sacrifice. And one of the things Antiochus Epiphanes did was he sacrificed a pig on the altar, so desecrated the whole thing, and it had to be later cleansed and all that. But we know we're not talking about Antiochus here. We're talking about the Antichrist. And when we get to this, it refers to the time of the end. I want to read a verse from Matthew chapter 24. And I want to read this part where the disciples come up to Jesus and they're asking him some questions. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" Now, why do I emphasize that? Because the disciples knew the Old Testament. They knew these prophecies. They knew this passage here in Daniel where it talked about the end of the age. They had just come out of the temple. And now the Mount of Olives is about a mile east of Jerusalem. So they've come out of the temple, most likely out of the eastern gate of Jerusalem, up into the Mount of Olives. They sit down. When they were coming out of the temple, the disciples were pointing out how beautiful it is. And Jesus says, the day is coming when that's one stone be left on another. And Jesus, when he talks about that, is referring to what's going to happen about 40 years later in 70 AD, when Rome is going to come in and completely demolish the temple, Jerusalem, and kill so many of the Jews back then and scatter them. So the disciples are asking about three things. When will these things be? That's what the one stone not left on the other. That's the destruction of the temple. When's that going to happen? And then what will be the sign of your coming, right? They know now that he's been talking about going away and coming again, but they don't understand all that. So they want to know what about his coming, they're asking. And then the third thing, and of the end of the age. They know at some point there's going to be an end to this age we're living in. So when we read back here in Daniel 8, and the angel's talking to Gabriel, and then Gabriel explains the vision, that the vision refers to the time of the end. It's the end of the age. So we know that we're talking about the Antichrist here. Now, verse 18. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep, my face to the ground, but he touched me, stood me upright, and he said, "Look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of indignation. For at the appointed time, the end shall be." Here, another reference to the end, at the appointed time. There's different views on, when is the rapture going to happen, and the 7 years tribulation, and then the second coming. And some people will talk about almost like the rapture and the judgment and all that, that it's subjective. In other words, it could be tomorrow, it could be 1,000 years from now. When it says appointed time, to me personally, on God's calendar, I think God has a day, an hour, and minute, a time when Jesus will descend into our atmosphere and catch us up to meet him in the air and take us to heaven. And then there in heaven, he's going to loose the first seal. And the 7 years are going to begin. I think it's an appointed time. Now, we talk about the imminency of the rapture. I also think that God has wanted every single generation, from the New Testament generation, right, from Paul's generation, and every successive generation all the way up to ours almost 2,000 years later, God has wanted every generation to live their life with the belief and understanding that Christ could come back in their lifetime. He could come back at any moment. He wants every generation to anticipate and live as though Christ could come back in a moment. But as far as God's timeline goes, I think it's an appointed time. God's always known what day he comes back. And it's not dependent on you. It's not dependent on me. It's an appointed time. Let's go down a little bit farther. Verse 20, the ram which you saw having two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. So we've already talked about that. The male goat is the kingdom of Greece. So it's interesting. Greece is identified long before it ever became an empire, right? I mean, Italy was in existence, obviously, at the time, but it was not a world empire. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. So Alexander the Great, we've got, lots of history. So it's kind of cool that we can look back in kind of our history books and put it side by side with what the Bible says so long ago prophetically about the rise of the Greek Empire. Verse 22, as for the broken horn and the four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. They never attained to becoming as powerful as Alexander the Great. Then verse 23, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors, and keep in mind, these kingdoms, when we talk about the Greek Empire and then the Roman Empire. Let me back up. The first empire, the Babylonian Empire, that Daniel talks about, Daniel 2, Daniel 7. The second empire, Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians defeated Babylon and basically took over the empire. Babylon controlled most of the then known world. Right? There's no other nations or armies really that could stand against them. Obviously, populations and people living, east, over to India and, far Western Europe, south, down into Africa. But it wasn't a truly worldwide empire yet. But the point is, the second empire took over the first. When we get to the third empire, we're talking about Greece. Now, Greece is over into Europe, right? Southern Europe. The Greece extends down into the Mediterranean Sea, and then west of Greece is Italy. Italy extends down the Mediterranean Sea. When Italy or Rome comes to power, they defeat the Greek Empire. They basically take over the Greek Empire. And Rome perhaps spread out a little bit beyond the Greek Empire, but they take it over. When we come back to this verse, though, it says, verse 23, in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Again, we're talking about the Antichrist. In Revelation chapter 13, we won't go there just because of time, but in Revelation chapter 13, we have 2 beasts, one on the sea, the second one on the earth. Both of them are empowered by Satan. Satan gives his power to the first beast, he gives his power to the second beast. So when it says here, his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, that is a specific reference to the beast and the false prophet. He shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Well, we just went through that a few minutes ago. We're talking about this 200 million man army led by these leaders. And don't forget, by four ancient demons. We see in Revelation chapter 9 of the sixth trumpet judgment, four ancient demons, 200 million man army. They conquer the world when World War III, when the dust settles and all these nations have been fighting each other. The army, the massive army that the European Union, the revived Roman Empire, is going to amass through, I think, a coalition of nations, as well as their drones, their AI technology, they're going to be superior. And once they come to power, they are very quickly going to conquer the whole world. That means they have to go around, defeat China and all of the nations of the world. And in the process of doing that, they will kill 1/3 of mankind, Revelation 9. And then once they have done that, the last thing they do is defeat Israel and set the image of the beast up in the holy place. And from that point on, they rule the whole world, every nation around the earth. This will be the first and only true one world government, where one government rules the whole world, and he will have the authority given him to rule the world for 3.5 years till Jesus Christ comes back and destroys his kingdom, or that kingdom, and sets up his own kingdom. Let's just finish reading the last of these verses and a few comments. So he'll destroy the Jews. Verse 25, through his cunning. Now, through his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule. Remember all of the references in Revelation and New Testament talking about deception. He will send them strong delusion. And it talks about deception and sorcery and all this. This is all involved. This is the Antichrist. And this is one of the ways that he's able to conquer the world. And he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in his prosperity, or in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes. So he's going to withstand against Christ. Remember when just before Christ comes back on the white horse in Revelation 11, verse 19, just before he comes back, remember that 3 unclean spirits go out of the mouth of Satan, the beast, and the false prophet. They go around the world to the kings of the earth. They perform miracles and signs to convince them to all gather in the Middle East. They have 2 primary reasons to all gather in the Middle East once more. Try to destroy the group of Jews that God's been protecting there, right? That remnant of Jews that God's been protecting someplace outside of Jerusalem. But also to be there when the Prince of Princes comes, when Jesus Christ goes back on the white horse. Satan knows it's coming. He gets all of Earth's forces together. And he's going to stand against the Prince of Princes. That's what this is referring to here. And last part of verse 25, he shall even rise against the Prince of Princes, but he shall be broken without human means. Christ goes back, sword proceeding from his mouth, the word of God, and he takes the beast, false prophet, casts alive into hell, destroys the rest of the army. Satan's bound for 1,000 years. All that's going to happen. Verse 26, and the vision of the evenings and mornings which was told is true. Therefore seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. And I, Daniel, fainted, was sick for days. Afterward I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. So even though the angel explains in a general sense what the vision is about, Daniel still doesn't understand it all. We don't understand it all. But obviously we have more scriptures, for, Revelation and many other scriptures than Daniel had to bring alongside of this, so we can have a better understanding, perhaps, than what Daniel had. And then also we're very close to when these things are going to happen. So we see what's going on in our world today, just like we were talking about in the beginning, which I didn't comment about artificial intelligence, but absolutely insane. Quantum computing. I've been doing some research on that, watching some videos on that. Absolutely, crazy kind of stuff, almost like out of this world kind of stuff. That's all converging. It's all coming together. I don't think that the rapture is far away. It may be 3, 4, 5 years from now. We're still going to be here talking about it, but that doesn't matter. We are in the last days of the last days. And whether we've got days left, weeks left, months left, maybe some years left. I mean, God knows it's an appointed time. It's coming. And keep in mind, what Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, they were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage until the day came when Noah and the ark, and then the floods came. The day the rapture happens. Now, we don't know if it's going to be at night, in the morning, in the evening. We don't know that. It's going to, in one sense, it's going to happen. If you think about the world, right, in time as you go around the globe, in the different time zones, it'll be every hour of the day, right? When he comes, for some it'll be morning, for some it'll be night, for some it'll be noon. But our day's going to start out just like any other day. And then he's going to come. And I think it's going to be one day soon. I hope you're prepared. I hope you know Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior. I mean, he is our blessed hope. And that's the thing that we look forward to. We're not looking forward to the death, the destruction, and all this stuff is going to happen. We are looking forward to Jesus Christ coming back for us and taking us to a place of safety while he judges this earth. And then we're going to come back with him when he comes back 7 years later, and he's going to set up his kingdom on this earth. And we live and rule with Christ for 1,000 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. So I hope you know him as your Savior. Be paying attention to what's happening in the world. And, probably the best advice we can give each other, get in your Bibles, read your Bibles, get to know God better. I mean, even Saul at the end of his life, when he's in prison, he's about to be beheaded. What does he tell Timothy in 2 Timothy 4? He said, bring me the books and bring me the parchments, right? He's going to spend time reading the word. Listen, you're going to be filled with anxiety if you spend a lot of time watching the news and what's going on in our country and around the world. It's going to bring a lot of anxiety. We need to know what's happening, but spend most of your time in the Word. Get to know God, draw closer to God, and he'll guide us. We have no idea what's going to happen in our country. We may still enjoy, the freedoms we have here are incredible still. If he comes tomorrow, we've taken out, we would be, blessed enormously compared to people around the world who've been suffering their whole lives under persecution and death and torture for Christians and non-Christians as well, suffering under the evil leaders around the world. But what happens if the rapture is delayed 4 or 5 years, 7 or 8 years? Our country, it could get really, really bad in our country. And it can happen almost overnight, that quickly. The point is, be prepared, draw close to God, and just hang on, because one of these days he's coming back. So thank you for joining us. And Lord willing, we will see you next week.